First degree price discrimination. So this is chapter 11, first video. We have seen so far that how a monopoly company that enjoys market power can essentially charge prices way above their marginal cost. Can they do better? Yes, they can do much better. They can practice price discrimination wherein they charge different prices, much higher prices than that single price that they used to charge, and those customers would pay for it. And if they can practice charging different price for different customers for the same good, they can make even higher profit. So let's quickly recap. So we've seen that a company with price and quantity with monopoly power, how much quantity would they produce and how much price would they set, right? If they had only single price, one price. So let's assume this is their demand, marginal revenue, and let's say the marginal costs are increasing, and let's assume their average total cost is this. So we can quickly set the price to be such that when MR equals MC, we set the quantity Q star and the price that intersects the demand curve P star. So P star was that single price that we've seen that the monopoly can charge much higher than their marginal cost, because the marginal cost is here, but they're able to charge prices much higher. So this is one price. And so what we saw here originally was that the consumer surplus in this case would be for this price, consumer surplus would be here, yeah? And what's the producer surplus? Would be all of this, yeah? So this was one price, and producers are having a large surplus. But what if I could, as a monopoly with high pricing power, charge many different price points? So the reason why there is a consumer surplus here is because the price is at this point. In a sense, this customer was willing to pay me this price, but I am charging him or her this price. And so they are able to benefit this surplus. Yeah, so that's why this is blue. Similarly, this customer was okay for this demand curve to pay me this price, much higher than my P star, and so they are able to enjoy this surplus, and so on and so forth. That's why we have this blue area. Similarly, this is the producer surplus, because the marginal cost is much lower than the price. So this is now what your producer enjoys. Yeah, so that's how we get this area. So now imagine if the producer, who has much higher power, can now sell at each of these data points. Then what would happen? Then we should redraw this. And now we are getting into price discrimination. So first degree price discrimination. So what we are trying to do here is we're trying to say, hey, if I could sell not only at this price, but I could also sell at this price. Yeah, as a consumer, I'm willing to pay at this price, much higher price. So without lowering my price for this data point, if I could also charge and take this customer, so what would happen is I'll charge them a higher price, and with that I can eat up this consumer surplus, and that becomes now my producer surplus. So if I had price P1 and now P2, then I can charge them for this item P1 for these customers at this demand point at P1, and for this customers at P2. Imagine this to be like, you're selling this pen, and I could brand this pen, the exact same pen as pen, yeah? I could say, hey, buy this pen. But here, for a higher price, I could just change the cover and say, hey, best pen in the world, right? Yeah, so you could do a little bit of branding and then maybe sell it at a higher price point to those customers in those locations where you know they're affluent much more than those customers who are living here in this location. So now all of a sudden you are able to convert this blue area into red area. So now this becomes producer surplus. Yeah? But you could still imagine here, there is this area here, where this is still, this area is still lost. Yeah, this is still your consumer surplus because these people just waited. They're like, hey, I'm not going to buy at this price, I'm going to buy at this price. So this is still your consumer surplus. But this initially was your consumer surplus, now becomes your producer surplus. So this company with higher market power was able to eat into consumer surplus. Similarly, you could imagine if there are like several price points, ideally all the price points, but it's very hard to get all of those price points because you don't know the reservation price or the price at which each of your customers is willing to pay. And so typically what you do is in an imperfect first degree price discrimination, you come up with like several of these price points. So P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, and you slowly start to eat into your consumer surplus, and all of a sudden you could imagine that this whole area now becomes producer surplus. If you had these data points, you could start to see that for these data points, this is still your consumer surplus. Yeah. So if you introduce these price points, your original blue triangle is now reduced to these smaller triangles. So this is imperfect because if you were able to charge all of these price points, then that becomes first degree price discrimination. But now with these few price points, you're still able to increase your producer surplus because it's now much bigger and your costs still remain the same. So you start to see that your red area is now much bigger than what was originally, and the blue area is much smaller. So the consumer surplus is your blue area, and red is producer surplus. So in first degree price discrimination, we start to see that imperfect first degree price discrimination, several points of price points are introduced. Here it's like the pen, labeled and branded as pen. It's the same pen. I wouldn't have to change my cost, I just have to change the label. And that's still the same cost. And then I could say premium pen, right? And I could keep branding this higher with more luxury items, and these people who are willing to pay me a higher price, P5, which is much higher than P1, will pay me P5, and I'll charge P1 for those who are willing to pay me P1. Yeah. So in a sense, you could start to see that this whole area, you could charge all of these price points and convert all of these. Initially, this was even the dead weight, meaning neither the producer enjoyed the surplus nor the consumer enjoyed the surplus. Now, producer is capturing this, and what we also see is that this not only becomes a higher producer surplus, but even the quantity goes up. Quantity goes up because now more and more customers are able to buy this, and so now it's probably good for the customers and also for the producers because they enjoy larger surplus. But how good it is really for your consumers depends on like how much surplus in aggregate now it is for them, which you have to add up all of these area of each of these triangles, and compare that to like this original triangle, which was the area equivalent of the surplus that they enjoyed. So this gives us some idea of how we can use price discrimination. We talked about imperfect price discrimination with few price points, and a perfect price discrimination, which ideally doesn't exist because you have to charge infinite number of price points, and you really don't know what your customer's reservation price is, meaning what are they really willing to pay you to capture the whole area. So that gives us a good idea of first degree price discrimination as to how producer surplus increases, and we'll have to look at the net new addition of the consumer surplus and look at what was removed to see if the consumers also were well off. And then compare whether this is a win-win for everyone and creates a net welfare, or if it's just a win for this monopoly who's actually able to get even more higher market power with using price discrimination. Thanks. Second degree price discrimination, or also called as block pricing. So we employ second degree price discrimination when your marginal costs are actually falling over time with higher quantities, versus in first degree price discrimination, we see that marginal costs were rising. So when you have lowering marginal costs with higher quantities, when you have economies of scale, and you're able to then provide bulk quantities at lower prices. So when you can charge your customers block deals, say, hey, if you buy, let's say, a certain amount of quantity, I charge you higher price, but if you buy more quantity, I'll charge you lower price, and if you buy even more quantity, then I'll charge you even lower price. So that's when you can apply some sort of pricing based on quantity blocks. So you could say, hey, this is Q1 quantity, Q2 quantity, Q3 quantity, and you have pricing, and that applies specifically when your marginal costs are going down, yeah? When your marginal costs are going down, so let's say this is your marginal cost and this is your average total cost, yeah? So when your marginal costs are going down, then you can use this. Why? So let's look at our demand. Our demand curve would look like this, and then let's say our marginal revenue looks like this. And so typically what we do is we look at MR equals MC, and then we find the equilibrium price. If you had only one price, it would be Q star, and then the price would be P star. Yeah? So if you had one price, we would do under monopoly market power situation, we can charge this incremental price much higher than the MC price. And when we want to, when we see that our marginal costs are falling, we can even divide up and not just charge this one price, because what's happening in one price is we see that your consumer surplus is here, yeah, and your producer surplus is here, yeah. So we see this setup. If we can now divide this, instead of just one price point, we divide this into these three different price points. We say, hey, I'm going to charge for this quantity block 1, yeah, block 1 pricing. If you have 0 to Q1, I'm going to charge you this price. That's a P1, because that goes with this. If you're going to buy Q2 quantity, I'm going to charge you this. But if you're going to buy Q3 quantity, then I might have to charge you much more. But you would not go below your total cost. So you wouldn't even provide this. So you have to say, hey, Q3 was here, I might charge you that. Yeah? So P2, P3. Okay? So we now have three block prices. Block 1 from 0 to Q1, charge P1. Block 2 from Q1 to Q2 quantity, charge P2. Similarly, Q2 to Q3, charge P3. So now let's look at what is the change in consumer surplus and producer surplus when we did block pricing. Yeah. So when this happened, if it now goes to Q2, we suddenly see that this got added. Consumer surplus got added here. Because these customers who are now paying much lower price than your equilibrium price of P star, they're able to just pay P2. The consumer surplus got added. Producer surplus also got added. Yeah. So this whole thing is new, meaning with block prices, both of them benefited by this amount by adding this price. Similarly with Q, you also see additional at P3, we still see more consumer surplus being added and more producer surplus also being added. So all of a sudden, this original block, this surplus, the total surplus, went from this one to this plus this. So that's second degree price discrimination or block pricing, when we are able to increase the quantity and charge different price points. And this applies specifically when your marginal cost is low. We've seen first degree price discrimination, but there what we were seeing is the marginal cost was rising. And so super important to understand what economies of scale that you are facing and what kind of demand you are getting, and how are you able to increase the surplus overall. So that's second degree price discrimination. Third degree price discrimination. So you use third degree price discrimination when you can divide your customers into specific segments or groups, but you know a specific segment 1, let's say, has much higher price elasticity than segment 2, which has less price elasticity, meaning one segment is willing to give you much higher prices and they're not sensitive to prices, and there is another segment which is way more elastic and they're very sensitive to price, but they still want to buy your product but not at a high price. So an example of this is, let's say if you're traveling and trying to book an airline ticket. When you're booking an airline ticket using, let's say, your employer's money, you're not price sensitive. You are traveling for work and you are okay to book the price for whatever the price is because your employer is paying it and they want you to go for that assignment. But if you're going for your leisure trip and you have the flexibility and options, you would want much lower prices and you would even want to change which days you travel. So if there's different elasticities, or if there's the demand curve is very different for two different customer segments, then you can divide those customer segments and into those groups and then charge differently for different groups. So that's third degree price discrimination. So let's draw this. How would we charge for this group? So we have price, quantity, and we have two demand curves. One demand curve which is inelastic, D1, and it has its own marginal revenue curve, MR1, and there is another demand curve, D2, and it is way more elastic. Slope, if you look at the slope, higher the slope is inelastic, lower the slope, elastic, and it has its own marginal revenue. Yeah, so we have this, and usually MC, marginal costs, would keep going up. So now that we have these two demand curves, this being highly inelastic, or the traveler who is traveling for work, traveler who is traveling for leisure. So once we have this, we know that we can add up MR1 and MR2, or D1 and D2, to an aggregate demand. So you could have, like, let's say an MT, which is, something like this. Marginal revenue total, MR1 plus MR2. Yeah, so you have this. So what you do is you do MR equals MC. Should you do MR1 equals MC, MR2 equals MC? What you would do is you would look at MRT, which is the sum of MR1 and MR2 equals MC. Look at that price point. So that is your one price point that you could charge. Yeah. But what you would do here instead is you look at this data point and find out where is it intersecting with these two. Yeah. So you look at the quantity here and quantity here. So from this MRT equals MC, you draw a line that intersects MR1 and MR2, and you use that quantity. supply that quantity. Because what will happen then is Q1 and Q2 would add up to Q star. Yeah? So add these two quantities that you would supply. So you'd get quantities, Q1 and Q2. Once you get these quantities, you try to find out the price. So the price would be the intersection of this demand curve, P1, and here would be the intersection here, P2. So now we have two different prices, and so we can draw consumer surplus and producer surplus at these prices. So consumer surplus for quantity 1 would be this one here, yeah. And for these people at this price, the consumer surplus would be here. And what is the producer surplus? It would be all of this. Yeah, so there is some loss here, as you can see. If it was, this is lost. Yeah. Okay. So we see that the overall there is a much higher producer surplus and higher consumer surplus. If you had to just charge one price, yeah, which is this equilibrium price, then the producer surplus would be much smaller. Yeah, but now producer surplus has gone up much more. All of this areas, which was originally with P star, would have been your consumer surplus. Now it's your producer surplus. So you do this specifically when you can charge a price. You can charge the price, not the equilibrium price, but the price points that intersect the MR curves for your individual margin revenue curves, yeah? And so you get much higher producer surplus with this, with third degree price discrimination. And you could see this everywhere, right? You would see situations where you have surge pricing in, let's say, Uber. You know that there is a specific time when there is a game going on, lots of people are watching the game and they want to get out of the game after the game is over. They are willing to pay much higher price and they're not willing to wait. You could charge them much higher prices, and you could charge them lower prices when there is elasticity, highly elastic. MR2, D2 is elastic than D1, and you charge them lower price and still capture quite a bit of producer surplus. So as we saw here, we are able to sell to different markets where there is high inelasticity of demand compared to these markets where there is elasticity. But there may be even smaller markets with demand curves that are like, let's say here, yeah, MR D3, yeah, this is D3 and it has its own marginal revenue curve. So these are smaller markets here as well. So as I said, in this case, what would happen is your MRT would be MR1 plus MR2 plus MR3, yeah? But you would start to see that the equilibrium price, this line will never intersect this MR curves, because you in P star, you'll be better off selling at P star than to sell at sell here, yeah? Because what you would have to do is you would have to look at where is this intersecting, and it will be lower than your even the single price point. And so here there is no price at which this becomes a profitable space. So if you have a smaller market where you're not even able to charge a higher price than your equilibrium price, or that single one price, then you're better off just to not even sell to this market. And if you want to practice single price, then you go with P star. If you want to do third degree price discrimination and you're able to charge much higher prices, then you go for that, yeah? But you ignore the smaller markets when it's not even profitable compared to your one price that you can sell in a monopoly. Thanks.